company.
Serenity now, dear people. From the Sunshine State, I'm Greg Carlwood, and though many of us spend close to 20% of our lives or more in some sort of schooling, we tend to end up completely ignorant of how to navigate the natural world or recognize the intelligence within it. We never learn to identify plants, how to forage for useful herbs and fungus, what grows around us that is safe to eat, how to find or clean water, or really anything to help us survive even a day in our own environment. Sounds like a lot of wasted hours to me. In fact, the extent of most Americans' knowledge of such things starts and stops with how to keep a lawn pristine and green at the risk of fines from the neighborhood HOA overlords, if they're lucky enough to have a lawn at all. It seems that if it doesn't hook you deeper into the indoctrination of a meaningless materialist reality, a fictionalized human evolution story, the shackles of a debt-based currency model, system dependence, or trust in the big machine, then you really don't need to learn it. But fear not, because with us today is the great Dr. Barre Lando, who holds an impressive amount of knowledge and has really dedicated his life to studying and engaging with natural systems and extracting what they tell us about the world and even ourselves. He's a bioterrain specialist, permaculture farmer, herbalist, alchemist, soil analysis expert, and shining example of the real way we win. You can hear him regularly on the AlphaCast and check out his wide range of natural offerings at alphavedic.com. He was here once in 2021, and I'm happy to be doing the dance again from the lost coast of California, the Alpha Vedic alchemist, toroidal field teacher, and organic gardening guru, Dr. Lando. Welcome back.
Hey, Greg, hard to follow that. You're awesome, man. Good to see you again. And hey, you're absolutely my favorite interviewer out there, so I'm honored to be with you.
Oh, I'm honored to hear that. And this is a real pleasure. I've learned a lot from you over the years, and the catalyst for this one has been that I've gotten interested in the doctrine of signatures, as they call it. The examples are just a lot of fun and almost like a mnemonic device, because trying to really learn about plants and herbs and the benefits of everything can be really intimidating if you never studied it and are late in life. And it's sort of like an introductory cheat code to me. So I was looking for a guest on that topic, and I just thought, well, this sounds like something Barre would know well. And you answered in the affirmative, and here we are. So how would you define the doctrine of signatures, the law of signatures, and its usefulness if someone is trying to take steps towards knowing the plant world better?
Yeah, it's a great place to start. The doctrine of signatures really acknowledges that there are common patterns running throughout nature. And, one of my first specialties a long time ago when I was in naturopathic college, I majored or specialized in classical homeopathy and also Oriental medicine. And I learned in the real old school purist homeopathic indoctrination. And as with all things, as they should, things have progressed. And over the years, I've been able to integrate a lot of other knowledge from other schools that have been around forever. And it really simplifies homeopathy and the doctrine of signatures. When you're studying homeopathy, it's overwhelming. You have hundreds of possible remedies, and you're trying to pair them up with people and their conditions and so forth. And the simple answer to your question, doctrine of signatures, means that if somebody has some issues, an ailment or symptoms, then there is a homeopathically attenuated plant remedy that will be similar to those issues. You take that and it drives those issues to the surface so that the body can heal and overcome them. And from there, though, that's really a good launching pad to understand what we're really dealing with. And also in that, a way to simplify the understanding of how we can use the law of signatures, not just with homeopathic remedies, but with everything we do.
Yes. And it definitely is a little simplistic. It's kind of kindergarten stuff. I know that that's kind of what you think about it. And that's basically where I think a lot of listeners are. I'm 40 years old this year. I still feel like I know almost nothing about the world I live in. And I took down some examples of this for people who might not be familiar, but carrots. So when you slice a carrot, it resembles the human eye, and they're known for their beta carotene, which the body uses to make vitamin A, supporting good vision. Walnuts, the shape of a walnut, resembles a brain with its two hemispheres and wrinkles mimicking the cortex. Walnuts are known for supporting brain function. Sweet potatoes, they're believed to resemble the pancreas and are known for helping to balance blood sugar levels. Lungwort, it's a plant with speckled leaves resembling lungs and was traditionally used to treat respiratory ailments like coughs. Ginger's shape and texture, particularly its root, are reminiscent of the stomach, and it helps digestion and nausea. Elderberry is believed to be a blood purifier, and it does have kind of that dark coloring to it, I suppose. Those are just a couple of examples that get the mind thinking on this sort of track. I got a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, and I think this is a good segue to get kids when they're young to be like, no, there is a design here. There is an intelligence here. It's not just random chaos as we're told. And these are kind of the building blocks, the Lego blocks of maybe scaling up to understanding more complex things. But these examples, they're just fascinating to me. The carrots and the walnuts in particular, I like it.
Yeah, and those aren't just fanciful metaphors or coincidences that there's some kind of resemblance between those elements in the plant kingdom and tissues and organs in our body. It is all by design. Maybe we could back up with some fundamentals and we'll try to keep this brief. My belief system, and the belief system that is also shared by many luminaries that have gone before both of us. And by the way, I'm almost twice your age and I'm still in school. I don't pretend to be an expert in anything, still learning. And, being a student is the fun part of being in an embodiment in the first place. So we want to keep that childlike zest of curiosity alive, amongst everything. So if you just look, there's 7 colors in the rainbow. When you get into alchemical sciences, they talk about the 7 sacred planets, which could be literal or allegorical, take your pick. There's, 7 tonal fields. Walter Russell in his brilliant delineation of how our universe works through the understanding of waveform mechanics. He talks about the octaves within the mineral kingdom and how each of those mineral kingdoms have tonal fields that mimic everything I just said. And if you go back to the original teachings that were kept alive through the Rosicrucians and merged into theosophical and then finally into anthroposophical teachings of Rudolf Steiner, they recognize these 7 attributes in the theosophical circles. And, there's been a lot of misinformation put out about these and misunderstandings, we'll say, where people try to pin some of these teachings to dark or, sinister forces. And the fact is the more you get into it, you realize, wow, this is the way the universe works. And some folks out there have tried to keep this information secretive for their own reasons, doesn't even matter. And therefore, this disinformation, has been purposely put out there to dissuade people from really digging in and understanding the simple truths that you and I are talking about today. So in the theosophical world, they talk about the 7 rays. And I think of them as more the 7 attributes. When you go into the alchemical studies, they talk about these factors as being the building blocks of our entire realm. Now, these 7 rays, these attributes, carry through the 4 kingdoms of nature, beginning with the mineral kingdom. We could really get into the weeds about each one of these, but the mineral kingdom are, again, those building blocks of life. And remember, the mineral kingdom are not these set elements, as we learned in high school chemistry, that are just there as fixed crystallized elements. They're actually transmuting through octaves all the time, like Walter Russell really gave us a good understanding. So everything in nature is in flux and becoming one, then the next. And it does so by going through these octaves and tonal fields. And 7 is our key number here. Now, the vegetable kingdom also has certain attributes of the 7, 3 in number. The mineral has 2. We won't go through each one right now. And each of these attributes gives the mineral kingdom and the vegetable kingdom just the characteristics that we've come to recognize that you described. And then you have the animal kingdom that then incorporates those attributes from the mineral and the vegetable kingdom. And the animal kingdom gets 2 more of those attributes into their makeup that make them the next level of animation. And then the human kingdom is very unique in that we incorporate all of the attributes of the prior 3 kingdoms. So what I'm trying to suggest is that all that the mineral, vegetable, and animal kingdom become through these attributes, and then we incorporate those. Now, as we embryologically unfold, when we embody, we are in fact going through an embryological evolution while we're still in the womb of the attributes of every single one of the characteristics of each of the 3 prior kingdoms. And therefore, our organs, our tissues, and so forth take on a resemblance that is shared with those other kingdoms. So that goes a long way if you pondered a little bit more deeply. And if we had time to go into every single attribute, which would take hours, you would start to understand why a turnip looks like a particular tissue in our body.
Right. That's basically what I was going to go to next after examples is how is this possible? What does it teach us? I mean, there's a lot of philosophical and cosmological implications of this understanding. And it does seem like the general idea, like obviously you just laid out quite a bit of detail, but things filter down from the realm of consciousness. And with consciousness, which is intelligent, sometimes there's visual cues that tip the human off as to what something might be good for. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. And when we talk about these attributes, they're not just physical attributes, they are actual energies or a type of consciousness. So if you take each of the 7 attributes or rays, whatever you like to call them, it explains why humans endowed with a free will and the ability to have an idea, in other words, a consciousness that is free range compared to the other kingdoms of nature. And when we have an idea, it creates polarization of electricity, which creates a resonance, which sets the whole creative cycle in process through the etheric realms, which means we are co-creators. And in the human realm, rather than just taking on physical characteristics, we become conscious of those intelligences directed or incorporated, or that are each of those 7 attributes, like, will, love, wisdom, select intelligence, the ability to really get in with our so-called scientific minds and inspect and really put the pieces together, attributes of creating order out of chaos, which would be the 4th ray, the ability to just develop a devotion to higher ideals, to understand that there is higher intelligences that are overseeing us and giving us the opportunity to do what they do, which would be the 6th ray. And then the 7th ray, which is a big one in the mineral kingdom, is the ray of transmutation. And the old school doctrines tell us that right now we are living in an era of the 7th ray, which means we are now understanding that our universe that we have created is always in flux, always under our direction, and always capable of transmuting into anything we direct it into with our intentions. And that's where we understand the 7th ray being prominent in the mineral kingdom, because first off, as Walter Russell said again, each mineral takes its own position in through those octaves, like gold becomes silver and hydrogen becomes, and they all cycle through and one becomes the other over eons of time, and nothing is fixed. And when we understand how to play that musical system with our own consciousness, then we are masters of the universe. That's what I believe we are here to become.
Yeah, I like that. I've used the analogy of the grand piano of life before. That seems apt because you can play keys that don't seem to sound nearly as good as if you play proper chords and if you're in resonance and frequency. Like that all kind of works with instruments. It's a pretty good analogy. And you said so many little things there I want to ask you about, but just to throw out two quick other examples of this Doctrine of Signatures thing before I lay it down. So when it comes to the first known writing of Dioscordes, he wrote about medicine in ancient Rome. And in the year 65, this is the first reference of such a thing, but he wrote, "The herb Scorpius resembles the tail of the scorpion and is good against its biting." So that's just interesting. But then we also have willow too. Herbalists of the past observed that the willow tree grew in damp and moist environments. Thus, according to the Doctrine of Signatures, willow bark was recommended for anyone suffering from rheumatic complaints, which were often aggravated by damp conditions. Later in the timeline of history, the inner bark of the willow tree was found to contain salilic acid, and salilic acid was first synthesized in 1838 as the basis for our modern day aspirin tablets. That's obviously could throw out a whole nother layer of this thing, that all the medicines that people go to when they need something are derived from the plant kingdom and then tweaked just enough to patent them and put them in a bottle. But we know with just foods, anything nature produces is most potent and freshest when it's, basically still being grown or freshly picked. If you took the foods you eat, and some people do, and you put them through a blender and put them through a factory and turn them into a powder and then reconstitute them and put them in a bag and put them on a shelf at a grocery store, let them sit there for a few weeks after they've already traveled through a truck and they get to you, that's dead food. Well, the same would be true for the things you put in your body that are supposed to heal you. You're going in, you're synthesizing it, you're cutting it, you're burning it, you're throwing it in a pill. It's like, we go to aspirin and we think, oh, aspirin, that's going to help my headache. But if someone were to give you willow, you'd be like, stop with that weak tea. Give me the good stuff. And it's such a flip on the way we should think about things. But I wanted to ask, outside of the Doctrine of Signatures, I know there are basic rules or laws of nature that would help a person understand plants and herbs better. For example, I read that plants with milky sap tend to be poisonous. Also, glossy or waxy leaves tend to be poisonous as well. So there's like little codes that are there that help us. I'm sure there's exceptions to every rule, but it's just intimidating to go in and try to become an expert and every little thing. I buy books of herbology for when I need something or my kids get sick. And then I'm like, oh, that'll be my resource. And then when I really need it, I don't have the energy or time to flip through a book and find a thing, and then that thing probably doesn't even grow in my area. So it just becomes a problem for me. But what are some basic rules or laws of nature you think someone trying to engage with it could look at for insights into how things work broadly?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. Maybe if I answer first, you will address what you just said. First, let's talk about the law of signatures, and that we attribute that typically to homeopathy. So if you take some of those things that we recognize might even be poisonous as they're found in nature, and if you take those in your body, like something with milky sap or other things you mentioned, that it would actually create symptoms. Now, those symptoms, of course, mimic some of the symptoms that people have typically when they believe they have an illness. So in homeopathy, which this is pretty rudimentary, but it's worth talking about, is we dilute and attenuate these natural substances that may be poisonous or detrimental in their normal unadulterated form. But when we dilute them over many times, we're taking out the chemical constituents and we're left with the energetic blueprint. The pure waveforms without the after effects chemistry that those waveforms are responsible for creating. Now, when we take that, what we're doing is we're bypassing the physical, which is good because it doesn't have to be processed through the digestive system and all the organs. It just goes right into the blood system as those energetic patterns, and without the poison or the impediment of being slowed down by the physical processing, when we eat foods and herbs whole. Now that energetic imprint is going to bounce off of and amplify those symptoms within us, whatever the cause, drive them more to the surface so that the body can recognize them, mobilize its healing forces, and expel anything that doesn't belong there or deal with the disharmonies that created those symptoms in the first place. So that's the way the law of signatures works. We have a symptom. We take plant medicine in a homeopathic form that mimics those symptoms if we were to take the whole herb. But that energetic now drives everything out in the open so that the body can heal it. Now, if we are using herbs, of course, we don't want to use herbs in their whole form or foods that would make us sick. Over time, we have the ability to know through all the information that's been put out before us and just by centuries of trial and error, what makes us feel good, what's nutritious, and what builds our bodies. So in that whole food, whole herb form, those substances are analogs to our human tissues. And again, we go back to the 7 attributes and how the human kingdom has everything in common with the kingdoms before. So those foods that benefit us are going to impart the natural patterns of nature that evolved us in the embryo in the first place and that nurture us through every phase of life, and they keep our bodies whole. And in fact, one type of remedy that I really have used a lot in my practice, they're called Gemmоtherapies. And Gemmоtherapies make use of herbs and plants, a lot from trees actually, in their embryological form. So right now on the farm, we're in the Pacific Northwest, we're surrounded by a lot of conifer. And the conifer trees, if you look outside now, because it's spring, they have new little bright green tips. And so what I do is I harvest this new green growth. That's what we would consider the offspring for the next year. Those are gamos, which means the gems, the germs of that particular plant or tree species. And when you harvest those and when you prepare them in a certain way and concentrate them, they actually have the stem cells for that plant. And if you know which plants are the analogs, say, to a tissue in the body, take something called rye rootless or Cicale cereale, the Latin word, that actually is the stem cell analogs for the Kupffer cells in the liver of our body. So if I know somebody that I'm treating through my testing that is having issues with liver and they need to regenerate, and the Kupffer cells, if you understand, are really prominent cells for liver function, I might give them that tonic, which is going to give them analog stem cells that will work very similar to the stem cells in their own body and help their body regenerate. Now, all the time when we eat good, unadulterated plants and foods, we're not only getting the natural patterns that then are instilled in our body to help us be in a constant state of rejuvenation, but then with a little bit of extra knowledge, we can even harvest certain plants, certain parts of plants, and certain plants in stages of development to be even more specific if we want to be a medical specialist. It's all there in nature. And then, of course, when you take willow bark as an example, and you see these great things that are natural analgesics that will not really interfere with the patterns of your own being and impede them in any way. Then, if you take the natural substance and concentrate that without synthesizing it into a drug that now is going to do unnatural things and also override your own body's patterns and processes, then you can use them preventively, for certain conditions. Maybe they're not everyday use, but when you have issues, just to be more palliative and make you feel better, you can do so without creating any ill effects. Whereas the standardization form, they use the absolute after effects of nature that come from waveforms and consciousness in the first place. Then they isolate them, then they concentrate them. And so you're getting one part out of cohesive orchestration of nature and taking that in a synthetic form. And yeah, it's going to do weird things to your body.
Hmm. It's just also interesting. And you mentioned the patterns of our own being. And I remember last time we talked, you kind of said that there's not a one size fits all answer for a lot of this stuff. It is individualized to a person's patterns. And going back to the grand piano music analogy, I think that is true about people. There's only so many types of people, so many personalities. This part might be dialed up, this part might be dialed down. And I do think it is a reflection of the qualities of the system when you came into it. I think that's why astrology works. It seems like it bears itself out when I hear more and more examples of it. So I guess I'm asking, when it comes to the patterns of our own being, how do we get better at recognizing them? Like, we can look at a birth chart of ourselves, I guess, and get some types of insight, but that's one layer of probably many layers of insight we can get into ourself and our own patterns. How can we learn about our own patterns better to have a better life?
Well, a good starting place, if we want to go just a tad bit beyond good, alive food nutrition, which is, what we should all be doing. If it's in a box or a can, I always told my clients, stay away from it. Just take stuff that looks like it still has a little bit of life force in it and let your taste buds and your instincts, the more you get away from processed things, your body will tell you what it wants. I was engaged, in a very large international clinic for many years, and we saw mostly very, very sick people. And what we would do is in the clinic have places, because we have places for people to stay that needed to check in for a period of time to turn their situation around. And we would have smorgasbord in the cafeteria like situation. And it was all raw food. And they came in and, there wasn't any set diet or anything. They simply smelled all the different offerings in their raw form. Might even be raw eggs or something. If it smelled good, they ate it. If it didn't smell good, they didn't. And in this case, a lot of the foods they ended up saying, yeah, that's agreeable, are things that maybe in their normal life they wouldn't think of eating in that particular food, or especially in a raw form. So what it was developing an instinctual awareness, kind of like the animals do, They just know what to eat, when to eat, and when not to eat, especially. So it all begins and ends with the mineral kingdom. And it's no mistake that our creator did the same. And the first kingdom of nature, the mineral kingdom, has all the answers. And we could go deep on a level of consciousness to explain some kind of fun things. But there are something that in the world of homeopathy, even though they aren't true homeopathic remedies, there's a bit of a difference, are called cell salts. Now, the cell salts are 12 combinations of minerals, and those minerals carry the resonance that tell our cells what to do. Now, if you understand the universe as an electrical apparatus, a technology, if you will, you have a system that mimics any electrical appliance we have. And the end in the chain of that whole electrical conductance induction system is capacitance. So when the electricity is generated, then it is modified through a conductor to do specific functions. And then those informational fields are stored in what we call a capacitor. So in our electrical systems out here that give us energy, after you generate the electricity, obviously you have to have a way of storing it in a capacitor so that we can then take it and use it. Our body, the universe, everything in nature works identical. The capacitors in our realm are minerals. Now, if you want to broaden our horizons and look up over our heads, there's all these constellations up there. There's a lot of theories about the nature of our realm, its shape and everything. I don't even care. And I know a lot of people would chastise me for saying I don't care, because what's important to me is how it functions. And if you study through all the different schools that have been around for centuries, and not just schools that have theories, but I've been a student in the alchemical sciences, which is a very grounded form of complete science. It's not some mysterious thing with wizards with pointed hats and things. It's very much in advance of what we consider science now. But using what I've learned in the lab, I can demonstrate these principles as they did. So I don't just theorize or say, oh, that sounds kind of cool and trendy, so I'll talk about it. For me, everything has to have a function. And that was the same with them. So these constellations above us, whatever they are, they imbue a resonance. And the resonance is very much like what we've been talking about, which makes a complete orchestration as octaves and tonal fields within many octaves. Now, when you are born, there is obviously different patterns of the constellations above us, some more prominent at different times of the year than others. Now, if you really want to learn astrology, because astrology has been adulterated as well and, misused, we talked about the 7 rays. Now, there's something called 7-ray astrology. And if you incorporate the understanding of 7 rays and then put astrology within that context, now you're going to be very enlightened as far as what astrology should really be about. You'd understand why the ancient Tibetans, for instance, would use 7-ray astrology and understand who the next Dalai Lama would be. It's been used for a long, long time and used very intelligently, not superstitious at all or antiquated. In fact, now is the time where we need to understand these things even more. So if you're born at a certain time when certain energies in those constellations are prominent because of the time of the year, they are going to have more of an effect on you. It's not going to determine you, or it's not going to take away your free will. It's not going to do anything other than give you certain attributes a little bit more prominently. Now, if you understand that each of the 12 cell salts is a capacitor for the resonance of each of those constellations, it may have more of an intense effect on any individual because of the time of their birth, then you can understand which cell salts are going to benefit you the most. And anybody should be taking all 12 salts all the time. Now, these 12 cell salts used to be more abundant in the soils. Unfortunately, they aren't so much anymore. So anybody, even if you're shopping in an organic produce section, by the time you get the food and maybe the soil's been a little bit more depleted than it used to be, who knows, maybe somebody's spraying poisons from the sky and it's really having an effect on the soil nutrition and vitality of the soil, then these cell salts are really going to assure that you have the 12 capacitors that are going to receive the resonance from all of the elements of the higher realm that are going to instruct every cell of our body what to do. Now, some cell salts instruct the cells how to make things. Some cell salts instruct the body how to maintain balance in the fluids and the tissues. Not too many, say, fibrin accumulating in one place. It could create blood clots or something like that. And then other cell salts that are going to be responsible for the proper pH balance and distribution of fluids in your body. So the cell salts would be a great place for anybody to start. And then we can move a little bit more how that figures into the plants as well, if you'd like.
Well, I do hope we get there, but I gotta segue over to the realm a little bit. Talking about the universe as an electrical system. I like that. I listen to your show. I hear you refer to Earth as a realm a lot, not flat, not a globe. And I agree with you that the value is in what the system does, what it tells us about ourselves. And that's kind of the commonality I have with flat earthers is if you go down that road, there's no choice but to say, well, this is an intelligently designed system and there's something divine about it. And it seems like the human form is divine and it's a playground for the human form in some way. Like that's kind of what people come to when they adopt that model. And to me, that's the medicine in it, is just jailbreaking out of the conventional, everything is dead and random and meaningless model that we're given. So sometimes a wrong answer can bring you to a right place. And I shouldn't even say wrong answer, not necessarily trying to make a judgment on it. But regardless, it gets people to a place that I find a lot of common value with. And I have heard you talk about your preferred model being a toroidal shape, kind of for people listening, like a donut somewhat. Like this is the common pattern of energy fields, currents that make this almost donut shape. If you examine most fruit, like an apple or an orange, you'll see a roundish shape with an indentation at the top and bottom and a center core of some kind. And then you can imagine two fields going, around either side of the profile of that thing. And I'm very much on this page because I like the hollow earth stuff. And very often I hear people make the case that this is why we might have openings at the poles, because this is a ubiquitous energy shape in our system. It would make sense that an apple forms this way and the earth itself might form this way. And it seems like you're kind of on that page too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are teachings that have been here before that well predated New Age kind of stuff. And they're very science based. And they talked about these energy fields. Now we can talk about toroids. And the most fundamental axiom of all is as above, so below. The first thing you notice is that if you just observe, even at a cursory level, is there seems to be common patterns running through from everything above our head all the way through us and to the ground. And everything, I believe, and there's ways that I prove it out in my work, that is living energy toroidal field. Now, a toroid is, let's just say, from an intelligence from its source. We're a source on our level. There's higher levels of intelligence that are sources that create us. And those informational fields come down in kind of a cone shape. If you just want to make it geometric, a cone with the base up in the air and pointed down towards where we think we are. And it goes in a centripetal fashion and it takes informational fields, which is from the creator's idea, and it compresses them through several etheric phases, which were recognized by the ancient alchemists, who also gave each of those etheric mechanisms or layers of that mechanism allegorical names such as fire, air, water, earth. And we can pair that up with modern chemistry. We won't go there right now, but it makes perfect sense. And then simultaneously, now we're getting into how Walter Russell even explained it, there's another cone going up in the opposite direction that is taking those energy fields decompressing them so that we don't just have everything crystallized and dead as conventional science tells us they are. So they immediately go back up to the source in a centrifugal force fashion. They meet somewhere in the middle. And interestingly, when they meet in the middle, they have an equator. And that equator is where there's stillness. And that's where we should reside our consciousness. And I think there's disciplines that have been given to us that train us to just be in that place of stillness so that we can recognize the toroidal field going in both direction, give acknowledgement to the source while also taking a little bit of a hand in co-creating on the compression cycle. And when they meet in the middle, they also interestingly create a geometric figure, that resembles the Star of David. I'm not getting into any religious inclinations because it doesn't have anything to do with that. And the first thing I do, I have a very elaborate way. I'm retired now, but when I was practicing, I would do chemistries, a physical exam, orthopedic, every level chemical assays. But I'd always start very first with an assessment of the toroidal field. And there are many instruments that do that in a very grounded, precise way. One of them that I've used that I always talk about first because it was developed by an Austrian physicist and adapted for use in engineering and so forth to see where to build bridges and skyscrapers. It's been adapted to medicine. That's where I used it or learned it through the Paris Institute. And it measures the energy in the toroidal fields. Now, when I use that to assess somebody, I can tell where the distortions in the toroidal field are, how that correlates to physiology, to their emotional body and so forth. And it gives me a starting place. And then when I do my other chemistry, physical exams, then it makes sense out of those. And we use them all in conjunction. So yeah, I'm not just convinced. I would be so bold to say, I know everything is a toroidal field, including the earth. And the last thing I'll say is that there are many teachings throughout the ages, some that I have a belief system about, that tell us about very high intelligences living within the earth itself, not just caverns in places, but actual conscious, very intelligent beings that are perhaps far in excess of our particular awareness at this point in time.
Very provocative. So, in a recent interview with Brad Olson, I heard you mention that when the first satellite images of the North Pole were released in Time magazine, or actually Life magazine, you could almost see something there. You could almost see the opening. And then they added clouds to obscure that in the reissue. And that is something you said you remember quite clearly from childhood. That's really interesting. But you've mentioned higher intelligences a couple of times. The idea that there's higher intelligences inside the earth is super fascinating. The thing about hollow earth material that I don't really like is that sometimes it's not quite clear if they're talking about something physical or not, or something spiritual. People talk about going inside the earth and these ascended masters or higher level beings being in there. Obviously, there's the king of the world mythology out of India. And it's just like, is this a physical place? Like, is there a city, an actual city down there? Or is it all like an etheric city? That's kind of the part that is sometimes slippery for me. What do you think?
I think everything we think we know is inverted. We believe that our physical selves and everything that is reported to us through our physical senses is the most solid, real thing. Maybe it's not. Now, of course, there's people that get into simulation theory and everything, and I think there's some truth to that. However, sometimes we go to extremes and use that to suggest that maybe this experience isn't that important. It's of vital importance. And it is real when you're in it. And I think what we're here to understand is that everything we're experiencing is largely of our own doing and then learn how to make it what we really want rather than think this is a place to come and suffer and do karma. And I'll just mention this in passing because I know it's my experience and nobody else's, but a long time ago, I got involved in that St. Germain Foundation.
Yep. I was going to bring that up.
Yeah, not the new age stuff that spun off. And now you have all these people saying they're channeling so and so. And back then they said, no, that's not going to happen because we need to keep the information pure. If you understand Rosicrucians, the lineage that kept certain things alive through the Theosophical, then Rudolf Steiner said, no, it's time for the world to understand and created Anthroposophical Society. Then that was the precursor to the Saint Germain Foundation, where Saint Germain came through being the Lord of the seventh ray, transmutation, and all that kind of stuff, which is why he's overseeing this particular phase of the operation with the heart of it in the United States because of certain factors, not anything to do with political boundaries. So my experience in there with the original people that walked and talked with him, and I was the next generation, I was exposed to things that are undeniable, not just phenomena, but real grounded visuals and experiences that have been lost. And back then, and I was very young at the time, they even said at a certain time, which would be now, the original foundation would kind of dissolve because it was a little window of opportunity where they needed to do certain things through that. And they also said then later on, other forces would infiltrate and it would lose its purity, but that's okay because they got done what they needed to have done. So I have a strong belief system because of my own experience, take it or leave it, that there are higher intelligence. Yes, there are ascended masters. That's kind of a term that's misunderstood. All that's acknowledging is that the normal process of life is for us to evolve. There's a reason why certain master alchemists said the last enemy to overcome is death. And, it sure seems like it's real because most people I know die. But also in the teachings, you understand that if a certain momentum is reached in your life, then on the other side, even though it has the appearance of a physical passing, they are allowed to raise you into the next octave so that you don't have to stay on the same wheel of reincarnation. But are there physical cities? Yeah, but physical in a way that we don't understand because we can't observe them. Now, anybody that really practices and is committed will be able to see the electronic body over their head as a physical experience, no different than I'm staring at your face right now. So if you have that experience and you realize, wow, that's been there the whole time. And it also then opens you up to a greater radiance and other light bulbs start coming on that allow other experiences. That's a very, very real thing. And that's the very first thing you're taught in the foundation is how to do certain things. And that same master alchemist made a statement, I am the resurrection and the life. And I'm not getting all religious or anything here. This is physics. I am the resurrection is that centrifugal cone that is giving everything back up in an acknowledgement to the source so that I am the life, the resurrection and the life. Then the compression field then comes back in the next moment with the original unadulterated patterns of nature to reinvigorate and rejuvenate you every second. And I am the resurrection and life. That's why when that master went to India to study under another master that gave him that statement, he said, and this is from the original teachings, he said, at that moment, I understood what my mission in life was to be. And that just put together the whole thing of how he could be a co-creator. Of course, that individual came through in a pretty evolved state in order to take it all away at that time. But he set an example for what we're all supposed to do. So bringing it back on our level there, those beings that are not in the wheel of reincarnation that has been hypnotized into thinking there's only one half of the cycle, which is the compression cycle, which means that compression cycle does not have the ability to rejuvenate itself every second. And also, by necessity, goes through the prism of our own MK Ultra conditioning to create what we don't want. Then we eventually crystallize. So it's kind of a one-way street. That's what materialistic science is. And we go through physical deaths, we go through wars, we go through everything that we don't want. So, yeah, it's a real science. And that's why we have to understand how the realm works and how we can work in similar fashion.
Right on. So you said something similar in that interview with Brad about getting insights from this early Saint Germain Foundation and learning a little bit from them about what's inside Mount Shasta. And I think that we're talking about these cities or these higher intelligence communities that are quasi physical if we have the eyes to see them. But you were a little coy there too. Tell us a little bit about what you learned from them, or maybe an example or an anecdote about something that would be really unexpected, something we wouldn't find just trolling through the internet, something that you learned from actual experience from them.
Sure. And I don't mean to be coy, but I also have no inclination to believe that I'm imparting any spiritual truths on anybody because I'm in the same game and trying to figure it out myself. And, there's a tendency for people to try to be spiritual teachers, which I don't go anywhere near that. But I have had my own experience and demonstrable evidence. And in the Mount Shasta, in the Grand Tetons, in Europe, inside the Alps, they're usually in these mountainous places in the Himalayas. There are great masters that oversee these inner retreats. One of them we'll talk about is in the Grand Tetons. In those chambers, which have entrances from the outside, which you will never find unless you're invited into, there are a lot of things going on, including the development of very advanced technologies that are to be introduced to humanity when humanity can be trusted not to do stupid shit with them.
Right.
And a lot of technologies that we are presently using are watered down versions of some of those. So there's real think tanks that are developing things for our benefit. There's a great series of books too. I'll mention this in passing, and it's the only other set of books that was condoned by the Saint Germain original folks. And it's called Teachings of the Masters of the Far East. And here's a real quick gist. In the early 1900s, the British government was absolutely fascinated with all these reports of certain people that come back from expeditions and say there's remarkable men doing very remarkable things in remote parts of the world that still existed at that point. They commissioned an individual to go out on a couple-year expedition to try to find some truth out. It ended up being a 20-year expedition. And out of that, there is a series of books written about it. And they're all validated or evidenced by not just the government that commissioned the expedition, but all the experiences that were in them. And sure enough, after years of search, they were invited into certain remote places where villagers were walking and talking with these masters, and even people that we think of in very exalted terms, which we should, people like the Nazarene, were giving instruction to these people directly. And again, this was all formalized and documented in this series of books and then condoned by an actual government institution, although you'd never have that happen these days. So, Yeah, there's just so much evidence that there's a lot more going on. And then you can go into places where our Native Americans once existed and then vanished. And it was the same situation in the Yosemite Valley. There was a native population there that, because of the harmony that was existing, and that wasn't true of all native, we're not romanticizing Native Americans here, but in that particular community, they were in a very harmonious state, which allowed the masters to be with them. And then they just vanished. And to this day, they're saying, what happened to those people there? They weren't slaughtered by newcomers or anything, they just disappeared. Well, they all made a mass ascension. The same thing with the Anasazi, everybody knows it well. What happened? All this civilization living in these cliff dwellings and such, they're here one day, gone the next. Well, the same thing happened with them. And it's possible for groups. In fact, it's even easier if groups of people get together on the same page instead of talking each other out of the truth, which is largely what we have today.
Yes. So that's really great. It might be a little confusing for some people. I have a little more context because I've been listening to you all week, getting ready for this. And let me just add this. So, the Royal Tetons, this was a term that I had not heard. And like a good new term, it sends you off in a rabbit hole. And so I went to research the Royal Tetons. Apparently, this is an Ascended Master Retreat Center in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And the website says this is the principal retreat of the Great White Brotherhood of the North American continent. Confucius is the hierarch of this physical-etheric retreat in the Grand Teton Mountain. At winter and summer solstice, the lords of karma convene in the council chambers of this retreat to act upon the petitions of sons and daughters of God and to deliver the cosmic dispensations that come forth from the heart of Alpha and Omega in the great central sun, allotments of energy for the enlightenment and progress of humanity. Each New Year's Eve, the thought form for the year is released from the silent watcher of this solar system to the Lord of the world, Gautama Buddha, who in turn releases it to Earth's unascended evolutions from the Royal Teton Retreat. The thought form contains the keys to the outpicturing of the will of God for the planet for the coming 12-month cycle. So, really wild. People know about the St. Germaine Foundation and Mount Shasta. People don't really know about this spot in Jackson's Hole and the Royal Tetons. And in that conversation you had with Brad, when you mentioned this, and in this one we're having, you mentioned technologies. In that one, you said that there was some kind of technology, a mechanism that helps to see past historical events. Is that a thing? Talk to us about that a little bit.
Well, first of all, what you just read, and again, I'll just take the unadulterated information that came through with the original description that you're kind of reading there. What you read sounds a little like a lot of the original information with a sprinkling of New Age context.
Sure. I'm only trying to give people a little more context to make sense of this and where it is and everything. But yeah, I'm sure it's colored. Tainted, we could say.
Yeah, but the gist is correct, I believe. So one of the things is when, again, your light has expanded, that doesn't mean that you're a pious spiritual being above everybody else that walks around feeling good about yourself. It's just that, you've diligently tried to grow your awareness, and that is a real light of expansion. That's why, saints throughout the ages are always depicted with halo. I mean, that was real light coming through that at a point could become even physically visible to people, unascended folks around them. So when your light expands to a certain level, doesn't mean you have to be walking around glowing or anything. And you're invited into these places as part of your ascension process. You are allowed to see certain things of your past embodiments. And even when you're at that state of evolution, expansion would be a better nonlinear description of evolution. Then you are sat down and you look on this cosmic screen and you see certain past embodiment experiences that are not just given to you for phenomena or entertainment, but to help instruct you so that you can take it the rest of the way home. And then when you are ready and you need some assistance, because not everybody is at the point of expansion where they can resurrect themselves like certain people have. And by the way, they say that tens of thousands of humanity have all ascended. It's not like one individual. And Jesus in the teaching says it's very unfortunate how his words have been so misinterpreted. And I think some of us understand why they've been misinterpreted. So there is something they call an atomic accelerator. By the way, all this has everything to do with our original discussion of law of signatures in an extrapolated way. But then you sit in this where it's a technology that when you're ready will assist you in bringing in enough additional light that you can accomplish the final stages of your ascension. If somebody were to be sat down in that prematurely, it would literally fry you. So your nervous system has to be pre-accommodated. And that's why it's not taken lightly, as far as when an individual is there to receive that kind of assistance. Now, that technology is not a technology that has been used on everybody who's made their ascension, but it is one of those technologies that have been developed to assist mankind under the direction of masters that want us to be free. And there are many other technologies going on in that retreat, but that would be the prominent one. Better than the med bed, we'll say.
Fair enough. So I love stories like this. They're obviously hard to verify. There's a shape to the story that we hear over and over again, which to me resonates as something that's true. But before we run out of time, I'm curious what's new in your world in general. I love seeing pictures and video of the farm that you got going up there. I know you have so many spagyric tinctures and offerings in the store. It's hard to even count them all. What's the latest from the Alpha Vedic enterprise?
So the main reason why we have the enterprise is we are a permaculture affair. My wife and myself have had several homesteads, and that's the way we really learn how to do things, trial and error. That didn't work, back to the drawing board. And we're actually on our 47th anniversary today.
Woo!
So, and then 3 years before that, living in sin. So we've got now year history figuring it out. And fortunately, we're both interested in the same things. So where we're at now, everything else we look back was a stepping stone on how to do things now. So what our service we feel is now just, maybe create some things that maybe other folks can learn from. Not that we have all the answers, but a permaculture farm is about self-sufficiency and about, living in a way where you are self-renewing. And part of a permaculture operation, people say, well, that's great. How do I afford to do it? Well, we created a business as part of the full circle permaculture. And out of that business, we can finance our operation. And we also can hopefully make some things that benefit people's bodies, because that's my wheelhouse. So in the lab, I have a very elaborate lab right now. I can do anything better than any multi-million-dollar pharmaceutical facility. We've got amazing technologies, and then all within the context of old alchemical mindset, and just taking natural substances. And, we're always developing new things. I'm putting new things out there right now. So it's more than a business for me. It's just an extension of my vocation. And I can't give too many hints right now, but I've got the coolest stuff that'll be on the way in about 6 months in a different format, which you could probably call it my opus.
All right. Well, that's exciting.
But there's good stuff right now.
There are some good things on there. I saw a healthy coffee creamer. I don't really use that, but something my wife would probably use. Carbon 60, I hear about. 0 Point Gold seems to be like a big line of spagyric tinctures you're working on. I might have to get the sleep aid one. That's really beating me up these days. But yeah, lots of things on there. And it's good to see you expressing positivity into these products and It's just the way more people should live. And of course, people can listen to the Alpha Cast wherever they get their podcasts, but I love it. Keep doing what you do. I think you provide a great working modern day model for how a healer and a naturalist should operate in 2025. It is probably how we win. I used to think, oh, if we could just educate more people, we'll topple the system and we'll all be living in our UFO paradise. But the reality is the system marches on and you find a way to impact the world in a positive way, despite that being true. And you are a perfect example of it. So thanks for spending some time with me and take care.
Thank you, Greg.
Holy Claire Obscura, Batman. There we have it. Always a pleasure to talk to Barre. Hard to believe it's only the second time he's been here. It feels like more because I think maybe I've been on Alpha Vadic actually a few years ago, which really doesn't make any sense. But Barre to me is a real top shelf true north when it comes to holistic alternative takes on all things life and health. I appreciate him playing along with my Doctrine of Signatures premise. I've been wanting to talk about that for a long time. There's a couple of books on it, but the authors just didn't seem like the best fit. And it might not be a universal law of nature, but it's a good entry point into all the things that he did elucidate us on. I really like the way he sees the world and the bright minds he leans on for insight, like a Walter Russell. On top of everything he's got going on with the farm and the products they make, he is really cooking with gas these days. I've watched the progress over the years. I really don't think there's anyone other than Barre and Dr. Cowan that I would get my supplements or health aids from. I don't even know if it's fair to call them supplements. More like nutrient-dense, natural food powders and tinctures, I guess. I know Dr. Cowan at least does fermented stuff as well, and they both just seem like really honest, knowledgeable guys who are growing everything that they're selling from the ground up. And then Barre has that all-important added alchemical layer to what he's doing as well. So you gotta love it. But it did get a little wild. I loved the stuff about inner earth retreats with ascended masters. There's a lot of ascended master adjacent stuff that just sounds kind of lame and new agey to me, but this was a framing that I got really into. I've been hearing about Mount Shasta for years, but never the Royal Tetons or the Coruscant Unity group that I brought up in the second hour. But if it's information downloads from higher intelligence at actual inner earth retreats, how could I not be interested? It sounds like such an epic thing to be going on right under our noses with websites and dates and schedules and all that. But if the people aren't ready for it, then it doesn't really need to be hidden because it's just largely ignored. But yes, I had a game plan at the beginning and it all took off to be much weirder than I expected. And it's a great last show for May before the big transition in June. I'll have a more detailed and formal announcement put out in the feed before the launch of the first episode of June, but I am recording from a pretty nice studio now. In full HD video, multicam situation with visual references when appropriate. I'm stepping up my game here at THC. If I'm going to make a transition to video, I want to do it right. I don't just want it to be two talking heads on a Zoom call. So it's me in a studio and one talking head on a Zoom call. I'm sure there might be in-studio guests eventually, but I don't want to limit myself to just those who are in or around Tampa or willing to travel. But either way, the big concern for years for me has been how would I deliver the Plus show in video without YouTube's help and have it not be a huge pain in the ass with a lot of user frustration. And I cracked it. And now you can get THC Plus just as you always have. That's not changing. But then starting with the next episode, there will also be THC Plus TV. And I think I've structured it all in a way that free listeners, Plus members, myself, and the guests will all benefit. Funny enough, this episode about the Doctrine of Signatures could have benefited from the visual references, but what are you going to do? It's just another example of why this change is probably long overdue. But when it comes to the doctrine of signatures, there are even more examples that I didn't mention because it just sounded like Barre kind of wanted to move on to a bigger picture idea. But let me just say that a sliced mushroom looks just like a human ear, and it's said to be good if you have an earache. And the fruit of the pomegranate looks like a jaw with teeth, and it's apparently good for a toothache. I don't know, it's just fun. I love that stuff, and it's really probably what we should be learning in kindergarten. I think it's a good way to teach kids about the world. Anyway, the Plus show went a lot deeper. As always, we talked about the great work and collective awakenings, martial arts and energy dynamics, celibacy and energy cultivation through semen retention, optimizing energy for performance, and navigating childhood illnesses and understanding illness as a healing process, or at least fever and various symptoms, and a lot of other stuff. There's always a ton of aha moments when I listen to Barre. I'm sure some of you feel the same. Sign up for Plus if you want more. And now let's look at the last show, the return of the spicy Joe Atwill, and see what people thought. So I already saw a lot of the comments and the ratings, so I'm not going to pretend to guess, but I knew the comments would cover the full spread. Some thought this episode was too right-leaning and they're about to give up on THC as a whole because of how upset they were. But most liked it and thought I was a little bitch for being very basic and vanilla with my takes on the race relations conversation. Some saying the California hasn't quite been slapped out of me yet, apparently. But look, I knew it might go there, and I reached out to have Joe on. So give me some credit. Don't forget, I pick my guests, so it's not like I was forced to get into some material I didn't want to get into. And it's not that I can't have a conversation about spicy topics, but it's just a hard thing for me to do in front of tens of thousands of people because I'm worried about how carefully I need to choose my words. And I have a track going in my head that is constantly assessing how everything will be received. And my takes are probably more nuanced than it sounded, but it's not about me. It's about the guest. And I just wanted to play off what Joe was saying and, really filtering people by genetics and race and then somewhat arranging them hierarchically sounds very eugenics adjacent. That was my devil's advocate argument. And aren't we against that? Isn't that one of the foundational governing principles that we despise? Yeah, people always say, well, look how shitty the inner city is. Okay, well, look how shitty rural Missouri is, or Appalachia. There's plenty of poor, inbred whites who are so dumb they don't even know how fucked they are. A lot of people love to draw attention to the accomplishments of Western civilization while dismissing that stuff and then just highlighting inner cities as super trashy and dangerous. So I'll acknowledge that, yeah, there might be trends and, as Joe said, certain bell curves, but when it comes to the spectrum, it's so wide for people of all races and types that it's almost not useful to me because so many different types of people exceed society's expectations and maybe even their own limitations that have been placed on them. So just as a philosophical orientation, I'm always going to resist a position that suggests people are bound by their genetics. That's not to say there aren't racial or cultural differences between different groups. It's just that there's so many exceptions that it just doesn't feel like something worth spending a ton of time on to me. Whatever, we don't have to rehash it all now, but I think some people forget that I pick the guests and I choose the conversations I have, so give me a little credit for making a bold choice, even if you disagree with him or me. But I like Joe, and I find him compelling enough to revisit every so often, so just earmuff it if you need to. Now, as for the meetups on deck, according to the calendar, we've got June 1st, Huntington, Indiana, Hot Dogs and Hope at Heartland Harbor. Also on June 1st, Champlin, Minnesota, Elm Creek Brewing Company, Tacos and Truth. June 8th, a Truther discussion at the Trails Cafe in Los Angeles, and a Riverside meetup in San Antonio at Halcyon Southtown. And then, as I mentioned before, we have the June 14th, Lanesboro, Massachusetts Raw Milk Party. Don't make it too weird, but enjoy yourself. And then we also have now July 21st, Eden Terrace, Auckland, New Zealand. They're coming back around, Gail Brath's Ale House. Must have gone well the first time. To be doing it again, love to see it. You know the drill. Open and available to anyone to make new friends through the THC network, highersidemeetups.com. And we're done. The last of the audio-only THC episodes after 15 years. Look for a formal announcement with all the juicy details coming up in the feed very soon. All questions will be answered, all dreams fulfilled. So keep an eye out and take care of you and yours. I've done my part. Your move, collective harm wishers, naturalist dismissers, and big pharma ass kissers. Your fucking move.
Mama used to tell us stories about playing outside, that thing that we never had to do. They say life is better since they covered the sky and got rid of all that pesky blue. They had no protection from the sun back then, just scary exposed out there. I hear they fight over what they'd eat each night, a burden we don't have to bear. Because our factory meat cake comes every month, and it always tastes just right. And we never have to get dirty in here, because the pot is always white. Just imagine the trouble of finding some job to do, or finding your own home. The implants weren't made yet, they weren't as connected. You sometimes had to be alone, because they didn't yet know to trust the machines and let them care for you. So thankful we have answers now for everything. Back then they had to think it through. I get nightmares still of the outside world and those books you might have seen. I wake up screaming in the pale glowing night, scared my window lost the pixel screen. I dreamt factory meat cakes didn't come every month, and it almost felt alright. I dreamt we sometimes